Hello, welcome to Biology, the scientific study of life. Sympatric, which means some or same country speciation. In sympatric speciation, from the Greek sun together, speciation takes place in geographical overlapping populations. How can reproductive barriers between sympatric populations evolve when the members remain in contact with each other? Mechanisms of sympatric speciation include chromosomal changes and non-random mating that reduces gene flow. Polyploidy. Some plant species have their origins in accidents during cell division that results in extra sets of chromosomes, a mutational change that results in the condition called polyploidy. An autopolyploid, from the Greek autos self, is an individual that has more than two chromosome sets, all derived from a single species. For example, a failure of cell division can double a cell's chromosome number from the diploid number 2n to a tetraploid number 4n. This mutation prevents a tetraploid from successfully interbreeding with the diploid plants of the original population. The triploid 3n offspring of such unions are sterile or sterile because their unpaired chromosomes result in abnormal meiosis. However, the tetraploid plants can still produce fertile tetraploid offspring by self-pollinating or mating with other tetraploids, thus in just one generation. Autopolyploids can generate reproductive isolation without any geographic separation. A much more common from a polyploid can occur when two different species interbreed and produce a hybrid. Interspecific hybrids are often sterile because the set of chromosomes from one species cannot pair during meiosis with the set of chromosomes from the other species. However, though infertile, the hybrid may be able to propagate itself asexually, as many plants can do. In subsequent generations, various mechanisms can change a sterile hybrid into a fertile polyploid known as an allopolyploid. Illustrates one such mechanism. The allopolyploids are fertile with each other but cannot interbreed with either parental species, thus they represent a new biological species. Habitat differentiation and sexual selection. Polyploid speciation also occurs in animals, although it is less common than in plants. Other mechanisms can also lead to sympatric speciation in both animals and plants. From the results, as we see here, one mechanism for allopolyploid speciation in plants. Notice that species A, notice the cell division. From the results of this experiment, we can infer that made choice based on coloration in the main reproductive barriers that normally keeps the genes pools in these two species separate, and we can also infer from their ability to interbreed in the laboratory that, like the apple and maggot flies, these speciations these species have only begun to diverge. It seems likely that the ancestral population was polymorphic for color, and the divergence began with the appearance of two ecological niches that divided the fish into subpopulations. Genetic drift resulted in chance differences in their genetic makeup, with the results that females in one subpopulation favored red in their mates, while females in the other subpopulation preferred blue. Sexual selection that reinforced the color difference, as females mated preferentially with males having genes for the least mistakable preferred coloration. Pollution is now clouding Lake Victoria's water, so perhaps the sea climate's divergence will be reversed as it becomes more difficult for female cycloids to visually distinguish between the males. The gene pools of this kind of fish, notice that, and this one, the red and the orange one and the blue one, may again blend together. Allopatric and sympatric speciation, a summary. Before continuing our discussion, let's recap the two main models by which new species form. In allopatric species, a new species forms while geographically isolated from its parent populations, as the isolate populations of natural selection and genetic drift. Reproductive isolation from the ancestral species may arise as a byproduct of the genetic change. Such reproductive barriers prevent interbreeding with the parent population, even if the populations come back into contact. Sympatric speciation, in contrast, requires the emergence of reproductive barriers that isolates a subset of population without geographic separation from the parent population. A common mechanism, especially in plants, is allopolybloids, hybridization between closely related species coupled with errors during cell division that lead to fertile polyploid individual. Sympatric speciation can also result when a subset of population becomes reproductively isolated because of a switch to a habitat, food source, or other resource not used by the parent population. In animals, speciation can also result from sexual selection in a polymorphic population. Adaptive radiation. The evolution of many diversely adapted speciation from a common ancestor upon introduction to various new environmental opportunities and challenges is called adaptive radiation. Adaptive radiation typically occurs when a few organisms make their way to new, often distant areas. Notice this figure. When environment changes cause numerous extinctions, opening up ecological niches for the survivors. For example, fossil evidence indicates that mammals underwent a dramatic adaptive radiation after the mass extinctions of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Notice also studying the genetics of speciation. Let's talk about rapid strides in genetics are enabling researchers to pinpoint genes that play a key role in particular cases of speciation. In one such study, Douglas Skimsick and his colleagues at University State or Michigan State University examined two species of monkey flower. These are pollinated by bees and a hummingbird, respectively, keeping their gene pools separate through prezygote isolation. But the species so far show little postzygotic isolation. They can be mated readily in the greenhouse. The resulting hybrids produce offspring with flowers. Notice that in a wide variety of colors and shapes. By observing which pollinators visit which flowers and then investigating the genetic differences among the plants, the researchers concluded that two gene loci are largely responsible for pollinators' choice. One locus influences flower color and the other affects the amount of nectar that the flowers make. thus by determining the attractiveness of the flowers to different pollinators, allelic diversity at these dici has ultimately resulted in speciation. The tempo of speciation. The fossil record includes many episodes in which new species appear suddenly in a geologic stratum, persist essentially unchanged through several strata, and then apparently disappear. Paleontology Niles Eldridge of the American Museum of Natural History and Stephen J. Glaude of Harvard University coined the term punctuated equilibrium to describe these periods of apparent stasis punctuated by sudden change. Some scientists suggest that these patterns require an example outside the Darwinian model of gradual descent with modification. However, this is not necessarily the case. For one thing, such punctuations may have been less abrupt than they appear from the fossil record. Suppose that a species survived for 5 million years, but most of its morphological alterations occurred during the first 50,000 years of its existence. Just cannot be distinguished in fossil strata. The species would seem to have appeared suddenly and then lingered with little or no change before becoming extinct. Even though the emergence of this species actually took tens of thousands of years, this period of change left no fossil record. In fact, Darwin himself noted this pattern in the fossil record. He anticipated the concept of punctuated equilibrium when he wrote, although each species must have passed through numerous transitional stages, it is probably that the periods during which each underwent modification, though many and long as measured by years, have been short in comparison with the periods during which each remained in an unchanged condition. Stasis too can be explained. All species continue to adapt after they come into existence, but often in ways that cannot be detected from fossils, such as small modifications in their biochemistry by necessity. Paleontologists base hypotheses about descent almost entirely on external anatomy and skeletons during periods of apparent equilibrium. Changes in behavior, internal anatomy, and physiology may go in undetected. If the environment changes, however, the stasis will be broken by punctuations that leave visible traces in the fossil record.